Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Amanda.
I'm Laura.
And I'm Kendra.
And today we have a special guest star. Dr. Greg Neyman is joining us today to talk about writing books as a physician. He is a practicing emergency physician, research director, computer programmer, data scientist, and author of several books. He lives with his wife, daughter, and miniature poodle in Southeastern Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Neyman.
I like that 2 books, which is what I have, is the bare minimum for several books. It's like fun to have several.
I went on Amazon and there's several choices, so I don't know. Maybe Amazon's lying to me. We'll have the link so you guys can check it out.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I really feel very strongly about the stuff that I'm writing about, and I really want to share it with other physicians. So I think it's very important for our well-being to introspect. This book, I hope, fosters introspection in us, in our practice, and outside of our practice as well. So,
well, Dr. Neyman, thanks for joining us. Tell our audience a little bit about you.
Like Amanda said, I'm a practicing emergency physician. I'm living the life, as they say. I'm a PGY 19. I really enjoy the chance that I get to connect to my patients without having to go through answering services and also not doing pre-authorizations. That's really good, but also obviously emergency medicine has its own challenges and catastrophically high rates of burnout, which came out in recent studies. So it's especially important as I teach them how to manage their careers going forwards to prevent burnout. And my books kind of come from that place as well.
Thank you very much for being passionate about that, because as we see it, it's completely unacceptable to take the top spot for burnout. So just to be frank, but you're a busy physician. What made you start writing books?
So it was the pandemic, and we had a little bit of free time on our hands. So you might have noticed that. And I've always been an avid reader. I actually, during medical school, I journaled a lot of my thoughts and I shared them in a very comic style with my friends and family. And even then, looking back, I saw that they were kind of mockingly showing my fear of being someone who was incompetent and unaware of it and would end up hurting people because of it. But once I got into residency, this kind of fell by the wayside. I had a lot of these kind of anxieties bouncing around in my head the entire time. And it just one day, as I was turning a corner, it was August 21st, 2020. I was turning a corner and suddenly this plot crystallized in my head and I had to write it immediately. And it took 6 weeks for me to write it, and that ended up being my very first book. And then it kind of demanded a follow-up from me. So then I started writing more, and that's kind of how it went from there.
So if someone, or maybe a listener out there, has no experience writing a book, what are some first steps to get started?
The first step, I feel, is you have to be an avid reader. I don't know how you can be a writer without being an avid reader, because you kind of need to get the lay of the land. And it doesn't matter what you like reading, but if you're going to write in a genre or a style or anything like that, you have to be really well read there. And then the next step, probably the actual hurdle, is to just start writing. And I know physicians might have just a little tiny streak of perfectionism in them. You might have not noticed, but your first writing will be absolute garbage. And the issue is that when you start writing, you will compare your work to the finished drafts of things that have been published. And it will never, if you let yourself get discouraged, at that point, you will stop, and you cannot allow yourself to get discouraged. Imagine if you were a third-year medical student and you gave your very first H&P with a management plan to an attending, and that attending said, well, here's how it works at the attending level. I've been practicing for 20 years. And the very first time you do a presentation, it falls catastrophically short, which it's going to because you're a third-year medical student. You decide, well, I guess I can't be a doctor, and then go do something else. No, what do? You continue failing after that, and you continue failing less frequently through residency until you're an attending. And you can't imagine that you would pick up any skill like that you should just be automatically good at it. That's how writing's going to go too. You are going to fail a lot, and then you will fail less, and then you'll be a writer.
I love that. That is awesome.
It translates to so many things too, not just writing. Like, just be okay with failing.
Yeah, that is, I mean, that's just good life philosophy right there. So what are some of the lessons you've learned after having done this process a few times?
So it seems really simple at the outset, but the more you delve into it, it turns out some people are like full-time authors. That's their job. And if you're going to be a doctor and think being a writer is kind of like a day of golfing, it is not. There's whole like subfields to master in there. And basically, unless you are willing to dedicate yourself to that the same way you've dedicated yourself to medicine, there's just so much nuance there. I self-published mostly because I'm a poser who has auteur aspirations and don't want my artistic vision tampered with. But either way you go, if you decide to go traditional publishing, you are going to have to send out a lot of query letters, mostly to agents, because most publishing houses will not accept cold queries from authors, but only from agents. So now you have to apply yourself to agents. And if you're applying to agents, it has to have marketability. If it doesn't have marketability, they'll be like, this is beautiful. I can't sell this. If they give you the courtesy of even reading it. So if you decide to go self-published, which is what I do, now you're doing all the steps of publishing. You need writing, you need editing, you need cover design, you need marketing. And each one of those are legitimately a job in their own right. Like people do that full time, each of those steps. And if you are self-publishing, you're doing all those things on your own or hiring somebody to do it. So that's all part of it.
So what is the process to self-publish? Or like it sounds like clearly self-publishing is what you chose for some of the reasons you gave. And right. What, other than artistic freedom, why else did you choose that? And what were the steps to do that?
So it was kind of daunting for me to try to find an agent. If you look at what other writers are talking about, finding an agent almost always involves hundreds of rejections, and each of those takes time. And I don't know, it's very wearying to be rejected over and over again. Like I said, I'm a PGY 19. I haven't been rejected that much since I applied to medical school. And I don't remember it being the best part of the process. And I was in no hurry to repeat it. Yeah. So I felt I want to do self-publishing. Also, my books are kind of niche. My first one is basically, imagine the Pelican Brief, but with witches. There's like fantasy elements, but there's also real nitty-gritty, like procedural ones, like where like one of the characters is going into the Federal Elections Commission database to look for like the smoking gun and just really dives deep into that aspect of it. And I'm not sure how much when you intersect those two reader groups, like how many actual people might be interested in reading something like that. So I was not holding out hope that like any traditional publishing group would be interested in that. The process for self-publishing, so you got to write the draft, and then what typically happens after that is you find alpha readers, which is, I didn't know those were a thing. Alpha readers, beta readers, advanced review copies. I didn't know that was a thing my first time. I learned about it my second time as people said, hey, did you have anybody else read it? And it's like, yeah, my mom read it. Which like, how about anybody who's genre savvy? I'm like, how do you do that? So basically you find people who are interested in your genre and you say, hey, would you like to read this and give me really good feedback about it? And you have to find people who are willing to do that and know how to just not like give you a thumbs up or thumbs down, but say like on this line here, it might be better if, and this is problematic because here or there. And that's the first step. You got to have an editor. It's everybody feels that I know how to edit things. You don't. Multiple writers will tell you no matter what you think, you do not know how to edit your own work. And you should be paying for an editor. And in the self-published world, readers know who has hired an editor to edit their work and who hasn't. And they will put reviews very clearly, did not hire an editor, like 2 stars tops. It ruins the reader experience. Luckily, so I didn't hire an editor the first time. I hired a sensitivity reader, because I was talking about important, sensitive matters that are outside of my direct experience. And I thought, you know what? I don't want people to be offended, no matter how earnest I was about this. And my sensitivity reader also happened to be an editor. And she said, I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. I edited your book. I couldn't leave
Nice.
that alone.
Perfect.
So, and that's how I learned that you need an editor. And there are different kinds of editors. They're developmental editors that will kind of give you the 10,000 foot view of it. Like this is how you do things inside the genre. And there are line item editors that are like, this is a run-on sentence. And they're actually, I guess you can hire the same person to do both. But I imagine it's too difficult for one human being to focus on those facets simultaneously. So if you want developmental editing help, you hire a developmental editor. And if you want line item and you need line item editing help, absolutely 100%, then you hire a line item editor. And so that's 2 steps to the process. And like I said, sensitivity reader, if you like, my first book was what I called a whirlwind tour of feminism. And it also had issues like migrants in America. And I'm neither of those things. So I really needed a sensitivity reader. My second book tackles issues of race in America. And clearly, whitest person I know. I know your podcast people might not get that clued into that, but I can't be offensive. Like, I have to be very sensitive that if I'm not careful, I might hurt people. So if you are using your book to talk about your personal experience and struggles in like a semi-autobiographical format, I'm going to go with you probably do not need a sensitivity reader. But I definitely did. So once you get that, then you get beta readers. That's like they get a more finished copy, and it's kind of smaller stuff that they're going to suggest. And then after that, you get advanced review copy readers. And they basically, in preparation for your launch, they are the ones that kind of will review your book on launch day so it has stars on Amazon.
Nice.
Yeah. We got to
That's
be
great.
that for, yeah.
What's that?
You did?
No, for Kelly Casperson, remember her book, Urologist, that wrote a book, You Are Not Broken. And we got to do that, to have pre-release copies to review it. which was fun. I've never done that before.
Yeah. So did you publish through Amazon? Like actually getting the book out there, how do you do that?
So publishing through Amazon is probably a relatively straightforward process, as long as your name isn't too similar to somebody else's name and Amazon doesn't accidentally dump their works in your page or vice versa. And I'm relatively tech savvy, so I didn't have problems. Some people are really intimidated by the technological interface and might need some hand holding through the process. For me, it was pretty intuitive. I just there are 3 pages for each book that you do, bing, 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 and then it's published. The process, it will basically take a Word document and turn it into a paperback, a hardcover, a Kindle book. So
I did not know that. That's amazing.
So cool.
So I don't find that part of the process too hard. The big question you want to do is do you if you will get more revenue from Amazon if you limit it to Amazon only. So if you are selling on Barnes and Nobles and Kobo and other places, then you cannot be Amazon. You'll get only half the revenue for each Amazon sale. So then you have to decide Amazon only or wide, as it's called, where it's on the other ebook distributors. And for me, I just decided to keep it on Amazon. First of all, because my book is absolutely anti-big tech. And I think it's very funny to sell it only on Amazon. But also it means it's one less storefront I have to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, very cool. That is amazing. That was like a giant leapfrog for anybody who's interested. That was a lot of good information.
Yeah.
So being a physician means you regularly witness the human condition, and probably many have experiences that could be book worthy. Your latest book sounds like more of a personal journey. Could you tell us about it?
Both my books were really about me coming to terms with my trauma of being a healer. My first book doesn't have doctors per se, but there are witches in them, and I portray the witches as healers. And kind of the big thing for me there was the protagonist has an excessively traumatic experience, and all her colleagues are all, nah, you have to just snap out of it and get back to work. Let's go.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. And she does not deal well with the experience, and she does not deal well with, basically, it was an uncaring system that kind of crushed somebody she loved, and she didn't know how to get justice. And her friends were all, yeah, it's tragic. There's work to be done. Let's get to it. And she didn't have the vocabulary for the fact that her colleagues were not helping her the way she needed to be helped at that time. And that's kind of began her descent into madness.
Oh.
Yes,
so cool.
indeed.
Now when we read it, we'll have a little background.
Yeah.
My second book, which just came out, was really directly about a physician and her experience, her lack of insight into what makes her tick, her perfectionism, her terror of her emotions. Now, also, she has a legitimately traumatic experience, has PTSD from it, but struggles to come to terms. She persists under the invincible physician delusion that she can't possibly be affected by the ailments that affect her patients. So she doesn't deal with it in a healthy manner. She runs from it, and it ends up really catching up with her in a very bad way. And she never, part of the, I don't know, spoilers, I guess, is she never, in this book, she doesn't end up dealing with it in a healthy way. She just kind of goes back to the crutch. And that's kind of part of the, sinking feeling that I want the readers to experience, that it's like, oh, she was so close to insight. And I hope that will be a spur to people to read it, to be like, you know what, I could be a little bit more insightful on what is hurting me in my experiences. So yeah, the other things I talk about in the book is like, I feel that I'm almost like a ghost in my patients' lives, that I just kind of phase through, totally able to see what's hurting them, but by and large unable to change the larger systemic factors that are causing it to happen. And then I just kind of phase out, completely unimpacted in any measurable way by what I've just witnessed. But it's still kind of, on a psychological front, it still does impact me. And that's kind of the more fantastical elements of the book, are her trying and failing to help people as a superhero. And part of it is like, she didn't go to 12 years of superhero school. She doesn't know what the hell she's doing. And she's out there and she's, with the best intention, trying to help people and really doing a terrible job of it. And like really hitting hard with failure and kind of trying to reconcile her perfectionism and her desire to help with all that failure.
Well, I want the listeners to know that there will be, all they have to do is scroll down to the show notes. We'll have your Amazon links and then also your link tree for these. But man, wow, that sounds exactly like Amanda prior to 2019.
Yeah.
If you need a name for your next character, I pretty much did all those things terribly. I still do it sometimes. It's a journey, right? To have some introspection and growth. So what would you say to someone? Just this weekend, we heard of people who started writing after just they had been journaling and realized like, some of this is pretty good. Like, I bet you I could put it together and self-publish or do something with it at least. And then one of my favorite books before medical school was a compilation of an ER doc had just asked a bunch of people their best story and put it into a compilation, didn't even, traditionally write. It just was. And I thought it was a fascinating book. I loved it. That just everybody's, seriously, a bunch of ER docs' best stories. It's crazy. But what would you say to someone who might be intimidated or overwhelmed about starting to write?
So honestly, it's just start writing. Like I said, it's going to be terrible. My second book, my first book was a fully crystallized plot that just like popped into my head. So I just started feverishly writing it down. And then I kind of felt the bug and I wanted to write more, but I kind of didn't know where to start. And I was stuck on that for a bit. And then I just wrote, "Night fell on the city like a bad metaphor." Ooh. And that line did not make the final cut. But once the ice was broken, I could start writing. So it's just break the ice with anything. In fact, if you want to start with "Night fell on the city like a bad metaphor," by all means do it. You don't have to be night. It doesn't have to be a city. But it will get you to start writing. And if you write to examine your feelings, that's great. I think that if sharing them with others could help people feel less alone, I think it will be helpful for them. It will be helpful for you to know that like your feelings are resonating with someone and you're less alone. I think that will be very therapeutic for you.
Are writing books cathartic for you? I feel like it would be a cathartic thing to get all of these things down on paper.
It's very cathartic for me. I don't know, like, I'm trying to struggle with, like, should I do the big spoilers in my book or not? And basically, the emotional center of my book, skip forward 30 seconds, people, if you're very spoiler averse. The emotional center for my book is when Sandra, the protagonist, is feeling very bad because she thinks because of her PTSD, her colleagues are kind of extending themselves for her. She doesn't have to work night shifts. She feels like people are playing, that her boss is playing favorites for her. And he says, "You're a very good physician, Sandra. I'm happy to play favorites for you." And she says, "Well, I don't want you playing favorites for me because then everyone will think I'm weak." And then he says, "Sandra, you're a great physician. Nobody thinks you're weak." But he can't even finish the sentence because suddenly she shouts at him, "I think I'm weak." That is like the emotional center of the book. And it like shocks her that she says it because once again, she has zero introspection into her processes. And like, she's just like, what the hell just happened? And like, I want the juxtaposition. She is legitimately like a rock star doc. She's introduced as like just casually, she's an anesthesiologist. She's casually listening to pediatric rounds and she tells them like, "Oh, that guy can have MCAD." And like keeps like just goes on through, like she knows like her stuff, everybody else's stuff backwards and forwards. And despite the fact of that, deep down inside, she feels weak. And I want people to know that it doesn't matter how successful you are, that like, if you don't introspect and you don't tackle these issues, being more successful will not help those feelings go away.
I love it.
Wow. You know what? Like, we have a few clients who might be listening right now. Hey, he wrote a book about us.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. This is a story that we hear over and over. I'm so glad you used your creativity to express it in a different way.
Right.
Are you open, just by the way, are you open to people reaching out if they have questions about writing books or about your books? And if so, how would they contact you?
Everybody who works with me knows I love the sound of my own voice. I love to blah, blah, blah so much. Like, if you ask me for help, I literally stop what I'm doing. Like, I will start like doing CPR on a patient one-handed so I can gesticulate about like whatever you need help with.
Okay, we are having to put this episode on YouTube because you are hilarious.
Yes.
Okay, so if they do want to reach out though, so how would they do that?
So my Linktree has my socials.
Okay.
My webpage has a contact form. Maybe I would love to get not a spam bot interacting with my contact form for a change. That would be nice.
Okay. All right. So we will have the Linktree and the links to his socials in the show notes. So all you got to do is scroll down there and click on it.
And if you search Amazon for GREG space NEYMAN, that's my books.
Awesome.
Yay.
I love it. So are there any closing thoughts before we shut this bad boy down?
Absolutely. So I think the most important thing that I've gotten out of this is that I've failed a lot with these books. I've sold probably under 100 books. I am nowhere close to being successful. And I've put a lot of time, effort, and money into this, and it's gotten me, in any traditional sense, nowhere. But it's kind of helped me get over the fear of failure, because it's not like I failed and suddenly that one kid has said the emperor has no clothes and everybody started laughing at me for being a failure. That didn't happen. Like, the world still went on. I was still a doctor. Nobody like accosted me for being a fraud. So I think if you find a safe place to fail like this and can just fail repeatedly, you will like the fear of failure will have blunted its edge. So it's that part alone, I think, is very helpful to anybody.
I love it.
Well, I would almost challenge that, though, Dr. Neyman. Have you failed, or are we learning? You are learning. Not only that, but you came up with a second book. So we are excited that you have brought this perspective. But I say that success because you got back up and you wrote another book. So we're excited to have you on and excited to hear about this other side of of talents, treasures that we are good at as physicians, or we could at least try and learn new tricks, even when you're PGY 19, right? So thank you for joining us today. And we recently launched a new version of our online course, Wellness 911. So go check it out at our website, www.thewholephysician.com, to get more information. Until next time, you are whole, you are a gift to medicine, and the work you do matters.